The stasis pod was not on the manifest. I had pulled 3 manifests off the lifeboat's dead terminal before the terminal gave up entirely, and none of them mentioned anything in Bay Aft 7 except emergency rations and a navigation repeater unit. I was after the repeater. It had a power coupling I needed, and couplings like that were worth a half-day's wage at the depot in Tareth settlement, which was worth exactly 2 meals and a bunk, which was exactly what I had left to my name after the relay work dried up. I had been living off salvage for 11 months. You get methodical about it after a while. You stop seeing the wrecks as anything other than math. So I cut through the aft bulkhead panel with the plasma cutter I'd borrowed from a dead woman's tool locker, and the pod was just there, tucked behind a secondary conduit run, welded flush to the frame so it wouldn't show up on a casual sweep. Someone had hidden it. Someone who knew what they were doing had taken a stasis pod, removed the locator beacon, and bolted it behind a conduit run in a lifeboat that subsequently crashed into the canyon wall of a moon that nobody came to unless they had to. The lid cracked before I touched it. The internal timer had run its cycle. I stood there with the plasma cutter in one hand and watched the lid fold back, and the child inside looked up at me. Saranthi. I'd seen them twice before in 30 years of colonial signals work, once at a transit station on the outer reach, once in a medical facility photograph that I'd rather not think about, small even by their own measure, slate blue skin still misted with stasis residue, 3 small bony ridges along the brow like a crown worn just under the surface. The eyes were the thing, amber and very large, and they caught the light in a way that made them look like they were lit from inside. She looked at me the way you look at something when you have been in the dark for a long time, and the light comes, and you are not yet sure whether that is better. I said out loud, to a child who did not speak standard and a dead moon that did not care, "All right." That was the whole of the decision. I have thought about it since. I don't think it took more than a second. It didn't need to. I lifted her out carefully, and she was very light, lighter than I expected, and she made a low sound in her throat, not distress, something else, something more like a question. I set her down on the clear section of the deck. She stood without help, which surprised me. She was thin and she had been in stasis for however long, but she stood, and she looked at me steadily while I thought about what I had and what I didn't. What I had: 1 plasma cutter, 1 emergency sled rated for 200 kilograms, 1 short-range beacon transmitter, the clothes I was wearing, a half-charged hand lamp, and 30 years in colonial signals. The signals experience meant I understood, better than most people, exactly how a scanner reads a beacon pulse, what it hears and what it ignores. What I didn't have: a weapon of any kind, a communicator with enough range to reach the settlement directly, any clear idea how the child had come to be sealed into that pod, or any plan beyond the next 3 minutes. That was when I heard the torch. Not mine. Mine was off. This sound came from the forward section of the hull, a cutting torch going through the main access panel, slow and methodical, working its way in from the bow. Fetch crew. I knew the sound because I had heard it before on other wrecks, and I knew what fetch crews did when they found cargo they hadn't expected. They weren't violent for the pleasure of it. They were businesslike the way any working outfit is businesslike. They had overheads, they had a margin to protect, and they did not let sentiment get between them and the inventory. That was, in some ways, worse than simple cruelty. You could sometimes argue with cruelty. You could not argue with a ledger. I had 2 minutes, perhaps 3, before they were through the main panel and working toward the aft compartments. I put my hand flat in front of the child, palm out. "Stop." She looked at my hand, then at me. Then she went very still, just like that. Whatever she was and wherever she had come from, she understood the shape of that gesture. I moved to the aft access hatch, the small one the manifest had listed as maintenance egress. It was warped in the crash but not sealed. I worked it quiet, centimeter by centimeter. The torch sound kept going at the other end of the hull. They were taking their time. They had no reason to hurry. The canyon outside was rust-colored and very cold, lit by Tarith IV's dim, reflected albedo from the gas giant it orbited, not true light, more like the memory of light. The emergency sled was in the external rack where I'd left it. I got it down without noise. Then I went to the transmitter. In 30 years of signals work, the thing I learned that nobody tells you in training is that a scanner does not read a beacon. It reads a signature. It reads the shape of the pulse, the encoding header, the identification flags, and if those match what it is expecting to see, it assigns the signal to a category and stops caring about it. Fetch crew scanners are looking for powered cargo, for life sign bursts, for distress calls from survival gear. They are not looking for a standard salvage tag parcel in transit, because parcels don't need to be chased. I had 12 minutes of battery left on the transmitter. That was enough. I took the beacon out of emergency distress mode and rekeyed it to salvage transit encoding, the same signal profile a registered depot uses when it dispatches a cargo sled for recovery. I set the destination header to a dead address 6 kilometers down canyon, which would make the signal look like it was already in the middle of a logged run. I added a parcel weight flag of 40 kilograms, which was close enough to be plausible and low enough to be boring. A fetch scanner would hear it, match it to a known category and discard it. That was the theory. I had done things like this before in the signals office to route emergency traffic through contested frequency bands without getting flagged. I had never done it with a child's life as the variable. The math was the same. My hands were less steady than usual. I wrapped the child in the emergency thermal layer from the sled kit. She let me. She didn't look at the wrapping, she looked at my face the whole time, those amber eyes tracking me with a patience that didn't belong on someone so small. When I finished, I held up the sled and gestured toward the canyon. She looked at it. She looked at the canyon. She looked at me. She reached into the collar of the thermal layer, found something she had been keeping there, a small object, flat, carved from something dark and smooth, etched with marks I couldn't read. She put it in my hand. Her fingers were very precise. She made the low sound again, the one that was a question, and then she made a different sound lower that I thought might be an answer to her own question. Then she climbed onto the sled and sat down and faced forward. I set the sled moving. The canyon gradient would carry it. The beacon would do what I'd told it to do. The settlement beacon at the far end would pick her up if she reached the transit zone, and the medical team there had dealt with Saranthe before. I had seen their intake logs 2 winters ago, when I was still licensed for the relay work. I stood at the aft hatch and watched the sled go until the canyon dark swallowed it. Then I turned around and went back into the hull, because the fetch crew had reached the interior by then, and someone needed to be standing between them, and whatever they thought they might still find. I don't know if she arrived. The settlement never confirmed a Saranthe intake in the days that followed, but medical intake logs are not public, and I was not in a position to ask questions for some time after. The carved piece is still in my pocket. I take it out sometimes when things are quiet and look at the marks on it. I don't know what they mean. I know what she meant when she put it in my hand. That is enough.